Okay, I'm back.
Excellent. Welcome back and welcome to all of our attendees. I think feels like the right time to kick off, so we'll get things going. Welcome, happy Tuesday. Thanks for joining us for the Advatics Expert Mile webinar series. Today's topic is around micro fulfillment centers, and our panelists are here to share some deeper knowledge and learnings about how to succeed in the micro fulfillment world. So first, we'd like to introduce our panelists. Dr. Nick Vyas, he is the founder, executive director at USC Marshall, the Global Supply Chain Institute. Dr. Vyas is an educator, author, keynote speaker, and American Society for Quality Fellow. He has led over 500 projects on business and cultural transformation for Fortune 500 M&A companies over the last 30 years. He served as a member of the United States Department of Commerce Advisory Committee on Supply Chain Competitiveness, say that 3 times fast, and also the vice chair of the ACSCC's Innovation, Technology, and Strategic
Mm.
Competitiveness Subcommittee. Say that 3 times fast. APICS, the premier professional association for supply chain management, presented Dr. Vyas with the Supply Chain Leader Award of Excellence and his contributions and efforts in the development for the next generation supply chain ecosystem. Dr. Vyas, as always, it's great to see you, and thanks for being here today.
Thanks for having me, Trish.
Absolutely. And of course, we have Manish Kapoor, the founder and CEO of Advatics. Manish founded Advatics after 25 years of senior leadership roles at various organizations, including Amazon and FedEx. At Amazon, he was the first person hired for the newly formed group of Amazon Logistics, with the mission to build Amazon's own logistics capabilities. Manish led last mile efforts worldwide, including the US launch of Amazon Fresh and Sunday delivery. Manish, it's great to see you. Thanks for being here today.
Thank you, Trish. Good to be here.
Awesome. So let's kick off this conversation, and let's start with where, I think it all begins, the consumers. Let's talk about, how the consumer expectations have changed in terms of speed of delivery of something they order online.
Yeah, maybe we can kick off, and Nick would love to get your insight on this as well. I think the obvious fact is that a few years ago, it was few days is okay to get something, and as e-commerce ramped up, Amazon essentially has played a big role in making 2-day a normal expectation. 2-day delivery, if you're a Prime member, that's what you get. But what's happening now is customers are wanting things even faster. So same day, next day, it's going to become common as well. And I kind of stop there because I think as we move along on this discussion, we'll talk about anything beyond same day going down to 2 hours and faster. It's not economically viable yet. We'll talk about that. But I think as far as consumer behavior is concerned, they expect to get things faster, and financially they don't want to pay for the fast delivery either. So that's the overall trend that I'm observing. Nick, maybe you can add more and also talk about potentially it's different from globally as well from country to country.
You're absolutely right, Manish. And again, I think if we want to understand the consumer behavior, I think we have to think about the evolution, right? So if we go back even century, I think the idea was our ability to kind of have a brick infrastructure and have consumer come to those bricks institutions such as retail stores or corner stores or in your neighborhood or the old town, and they will be previewed to the inventory available on hand. And their limitation was whatever they see in the physical footprint is what you will actually probably buy. We went from there to the catalog, the very early onset, which Sears was a gigantic force back in 40s, 50s, 60s, and 70s. For those of you who remember the Wish books, I mean, that was the concept of catalog to say, hey, I'm going to give you a wide variety of offering, and then you can either go to the store and pick that up, or we can actually mail that to you. So that was sort of a revolutionary concept of thinking beyond just going to the physical store. Then you fast forward to the internet, and all of a sudden we started to talk about the omni-channel, that I can actually brick as well as click and actually having options to pick these things. So while we sort of build this infrastructure of online and brick and mortar and sort of start to merge that, I think the phenomenal trend that started to happen. And the trend was that the consumer behavior started to change, in which they say, not only I want to have a wider variety of selections, but I also want to determine the speed for which A, I'm willing to pay for it, or B, I want you to compete and try to deliver those services to me, right? So this sort of set the evolution of where we are today. And what truly drove a hypergrowth in this concept is a COVID, because that removed the brick completely out of it. Now everybody became dependent on a click. And here we are today in a very fascinating era of what I call an incredible evolution and revolution in middle mile and the last mile delivery. So I'm excited today to talk about some of this concept, Manish, and we can certainly dive into what we see on the horizon of how this is going to continue to evolve.
Yeah, that's great, Nick. I think what you describe is, used to be the push supply chain where products were pushed to a store, and now consumer is in charge. When they click that button, buy, that's what decides. Now the whole supply chain has to adapt to what they asked for, when they asked for, how much they're willing to pay, and so on. It's extremely dynamic now.
Absolutely.
It's incredible to think of the background and how far we've come in such a short period of time. I mean, it was not long ago. It took, we were ready to wait a week, and now if I'm waiting longer than 2 days, it feels unacceptable. Let's talk about the different, definitions of what a micro fulfillment center is. Could you help us understand, how a micro fulfillment center is different from a regular fulfillment center and just the definitions around that?
Yeah. Again, I can kick off, and Nick will have a different perspective on that as well. I think the shift from, first of all, a warehouse to a fulfillment center. Warehouse traditionally was where you would store things primarily in bulk, feeding into retail stores that we talked about. Fulfillment is different, where every box going out is essentially an order that has been fulfilled. And again, over the last few years, if you think about the large giants like Walmart, Amazon, and so on, they've built large buildings where you're fulfilling, million plus orders a day in some cases. And so those are large buildings, and they're designed to, again, serve and deliver in 2 days as far as e-commerce is concerned. But then when that 2 days starts to become next day and same day, you need to be closer and closer to the destination point where the consumer is. And that's when you have to start to think about, okay, how do I change the supply chain? If somebody wants it tomorrow, I need to be closer to that city. And that leads to creating smaller buildings. In some cases, the larger buildings feed into the smaller buildings. In some cases, you can forward stock the inventory as well. So as far as the size is concerned, of what's called a micro fulfillment center, I think in the industry we've heard different definitions for that. What we talk about is, a building that is more local, and let's say it's in the range of 25 to 30,000 square feet, versus the 1 million square feet buildings or 500,000 square feet buildings that we've traditionally seen, start to qualify as micro fulfillment centers. And we've actually gone beyond that as well, saying, okay, beyond micro, you also have buildings that are below 20,000 square feet, let's say 10, and those for us are beyond micro, become nano. And then in some cases, we have also looked at functional buildings that are even less than 10,000 square feet, that, again, it's not widely used, but we call them pico fulfillment centers as well. They're all tied with how to design a supply chain to deliver at the speed that you're promising to the customer. Nick and I have really good discussions on a broader, macro and the micro impact of and where the industry is headed and how micro fulfillment centers are going to be so critical moving forward. And nobody can address that topic better than Dr. Vyas here. So I'd request him to share his thoughts on this as well.
No, I think Manish, you're absolutely right. I think we're certainly moving away from this large footprint of sort of a push system, right? So if you think about traditionally the concept of replenishment, right, and inventory management, I think we have to reflect that the demand pattern recognitions occurred way before the consumer actually even had a chance to understand their buying pattern or their buying behavior. So typically what would happen in the past is that I would actually create a big blocks of demographic analysis as well as sort of a socioeconomic analysis. And then I will create sort of a large footprint and break each of the region with some demand sense, and then anticipate that to be consistent and static throughout the value chain of my supply chain. So when I create a purchase order from design to delivery, I'm almost 6 months, 9 months, in some cases, almost 1 year out in a very static way. We actually came from that stage to now sensing the demand in a very real time, in a very dynamic way. So if Trish and Manish both are living in the same zip code, but they have a multiple different demand pattern, now I gotta sense that, I gotta anticipate that, and I gotta react to that and service both of their needs in a very dynamic way. And this is where I think this beautiful concept of how quickly can you react to consumer demand and how well, both the cost efficiency wise, as well as speed to market standpoint, can you meet those requirements in a very dynamic but real-time manner. And this is where the concept of micro-fulfillment center truly comes into play. And I think, in my view, let me actually share my screen to give you guys some sense about how we see that micro-fulfillment center will play into. So if we go, right, so let's establish the operational definition, because I'm sure we're going to get into a lot of conversation about, right? So I think Manish touched on these things, right? It's a small subset of our traditional concept of distribution center, not the warehouse, but the distribution center, right? So think about this, a highly scalable micro-fulfillment environment that meets the consumer demand dynamically as well as real time, right? So this would be that you would have to sort of design and populate very close to where your customer density is and allow the replenishment to be as quick and as efficient as possible, right? Sometimes it's known as a dark store. So I mean, so for those retailers, so they have their physical footprint, their brick infrastructure, they actually sometimes even set up this in the back rooms or within the store to create this. The idea here is the micro fulfillment center, known as MFC, should be considered as a very close to the consumer-centric capability of having your inventory close so that I can anticipate, sense, detect, and deliver in the shortest window, but in the most cost-efficient way. So let's talk about where I see the projections on the growth. So a lot of data comes in, and they ranges between sort of $100 to $200 billion plus market size. This is just, I'm talking about the United States, right? This phenomena is global, right? You look at the countries like China, India, ASEAN continent, Latin America. Each of this region have a similar trend. So we can talk about those, but I just wanted to focus on just a market size here. This is a significant growth in capability to being able to sense the data at the consumer level and then being able to replenish the needs in a very timely fashion, right? So if we go through now and you look at it just on the both sides, because remember, we have to think about this from the supply side and demand side. And there are tremendous activity, both from the IT side, which advantage, when you have an amazing capability to provide the solutions, each of these players, there's enormous growth being anticipated in this area, from being able to create the highly effective infrastructure, having a technology, being able to sense the data points and deliver and have the track and trace capability, and then being able to meet the demand side from either the distributor, seller, or the retail altogether. So if we consider this as our ecosystem, I think idea here is that there is a tremendous growth in this area. Let
Awesome.
me
That
stop
amazing
sharing
insights.
this.
It's great.
Thank you.
And so you may have touched on this a bit, but what are the micro and macro supply chain trends that do make MFCs so important?
So I think, Trish, if we were to look at it, COVID has set what I call the lifetime habits and expectation, right? So it's no longer enough for me to buy something and then you get to dictate this, well, you'll get it within a week. Well, the consumers don't have an appetite for that kind of a response times anymore. So we have now become so habitual in order to say that I don't want to drive to the stores. I don't want to spend an additional an hour. So I may actually just order a bunch of things, and I want those things to be packaged together in a very concise way and being delivered in a very precise window. To Manish's point, it could be the same day, maybe it could be 8 hours, 12 hours, 16 hours. I mean, so the window is getting shorter and shorter. The speed to market is getting quicker and quicker. And I think we're just going to have to find out in terms of how quickly can we go. One of the research that Gartner did, they anticipate obviously 10% of the total e-commerce business being attributed to them fulfilled by MFCs, which, by the way, it's a big number when you talk about multi-trillion-dollar economy across the globe being serviced through fulfillment networks. That is a very sizable market. And if I may just give you a second data point so we can digest this data, that Accenture had done the study and research with close to about 150 retailers globally. Today, they feel less than 50% of them are meeting the customer demand.
Wow.
So if we think from that standpoint, the growth in this field and areas of opportunity is more than 50%, right? And that is a huge opportunity in macro and micro trend that MFCs really have to play that gap and bridge that gap and provide solutions the consumer needs.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think operationally, if I might share a framework that might help in this case, how do you even, once you've known that the customers are asking for faster delivery, things are shifting from a push supply chain to a pull, consumers are in charge. You have to like dynamically live adapt the supply chain to what the customer just asked for. That's what's going on, and as far as the trends are concerned. The question is, how do you design the right supply chain network out of that? And I think at a high level, the whole concept here is that anything that you put in place, whether it's a building or the truck that's going to make that delivery, you want to make sure that it's sized right to the load that you're handling within the four walls or on the truck. Because if you have too big a building, it's going to cost a lot. If you have too small a building, you can't process the orders. Same thing applies with the truck. So conceptually, the reason why you have different sizes of these fulfillment centers, going from mega to all the way to micro, is that you're adapting to the inventory that's flowing through it. So data analytics is a key component of this. If you don't analyze data and you don't design the supply chain and the sizes of these buildings and so on based on the flow of the inventory, flow of the orders, then you can be financially upside down pretty quickly. So I know we will dig into the interesting part of this discussion is how do you financially be okay with creating a supply chain for the future? And we typically, the framework that we apply is, we call it the LQ by T, which is essentially location, labor, logistics, and inventory. And how does technology and analytics apply to that? So location is, how do you define, first of all, you need to know where you're going to deliver, right? Where's your density of the customers? And then you have to decide, hey, yeah, I'm going to deliver same day, next day, and so on. Because based on that, then you can know how far you can go from the density physically. How big the building should be? Well, it again depends on how many orders you forecast and how much is going to flow through that. Again, you don't want to be too big or too small based on that. Logistics plays a critical role as well. You could say, yeah, we're going to make same day delivery, while same day complexity in Manhattan versus Dallas is going to be very, very different. So that's where you got to localize the design as well as far as logistics is concerned. And as I mentioned, analytics is key. Making sure you have an accurate demand forecast, and then you're constantly adapting your capacity to where the demand is going is going to be important. And then Nick briefly touched on it, the track and trace and knowing where everything else is, because consumers now expect it. They want to know where my order is and where's that driver. They're using Uber and Lyft, right? They can watch their drivers come in. Technologies, they know the technology is there. They're expecting same level of visibility and reliability for packages as well in this case.
Absolutely. So same vein, little different. On the note of, I don't know, accuracy, perfectionism, efficiency, these things that we have extremely high standards for now as consumers. Often MFCs are presented as places that use robotics, which can help with all three of those things specifically. Could you please share your thoughts on the technologies that apply for micro-fulfillment centers and the related financials around that?
Dr. Weiss, do you want to?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, remember, as we talk about the MFC, the locations, Manish talked about it, think about it as being very close to the consumer demand. Typically, these are the urban setup where the real estate is prime, and you need to have really very concentric circle within a high density population. So the only way you can cost justify in many cases is to have an incredibly intelligent software capability and an automation layer on top of it so that you can really replenish in a very dynamic, rapid, but most efficient way. So this is true phenomena. Every mega city, you look at it across the globe, right? 1970s, we had close to 22. Today, we have 66. It's triple in numbers. Each of these mega cities, which is the urban populations, the real estate is the biggest cost. And then access to the labor is the second biggest. So then in order to compensate and cost justify, automation becomes sort of a necessity, and your justifications to be close to the customer. So in my view, if we were to think about the return on investments or the return on assets, I think this concept is not only choosing the right location, but then fitting the location with the right capability to deliver the very tailored solution. Because one, there are no two customers are same. They are very unique, and one has to design. This cannot be one size fits all, but you gotta be dynamic and capable to be able to cater to that consumer need in a different ways. And I think the automation allows you to adapt to that. So in my view, it would be that designing of the MFC will coincide with the automations being part of their DNA.
Great. Again, well captured, Dr. Weiss. I think operationally, what we've also seen is that the ROI, or making sure that the ROI is there before you go and invest significant dollars in setting up automation is critical. And as Dr. Weiss mentioned, what you're doing going after is, okay, I have limited space. I don't want to spend more as far as location is concerned. Well, let's go vertical. That's where automation comes into play. Or labor cost is a big component. Let's automate this so that our labor costs can be under control as well. The third component is throughput. We need to process these orders faster. So those are the components. You're attacking space, you're attacking labor costs, and you're improving the throughput, the speed of delivery. That's when you start to think about automation. Having said that, we always advise to take a step back and make sure that your physical process is well designed before you start to put automation in. Quite often we automate waste and make it permanent. What that means is, in simple terms, if I'm moving something from point A to point B constantly, I may think about, hey, let's put a conveyor belt in. It's easier. Once you put the conveyor belt in, guess what? you're permanently moving that item from point A to point B. Instead of thinking, why am I even moving this? Can I actually move point A and point B closer to each other and not even have to move things? So the concept there is that, hey, designing a lean process is extremely important before we layer on automation. And then also making sure that the ROI is going to be there versus manual labor. Because quite often we get excited about the automation robotics and we put that in and realize that, hey, it's not, the payback isn't there. So I think doing the upfront financial analysis is critical. And then lots of innovation going on, lots of new entrants in the space to provide robotics and automation for MFCs. And we believe that the cost is going to continue to improve, the cost of upfront investment, because of the new innovation that's coming in overall. So that's the future. We will be doing more and more automation.
And Manish, I think you touched on a good point, which I think I want to highlight one more attributes of MFC. So Trish, your question earlier about defining the MFC, we have to also look at it. The COVID created a huge disruption in supply chain. And one thing it taught, both from the company standpoint, even executive board today is challenging. Why did we put all our eggs in one basket? Government across the world is questioning the same thing. How did we allow a pandemic such as COVID-19 to disrupt the global supply chain? About 167 countries across every single continent, irregardless of their socioeconomic background, their economic affluence, we had a disruption because we had way too concentrated focus on single node, long nodes supply chains, where inventory were positioned in certain parts, but it was in a large set. So we sort of now being challenged to say, how do we diversify? And I think one has to look at it that MFC can also become sort of an attribute, an asset of having this diversification. So even one of my MFC node goes down, I have a smaller risk, and my second adjacent MFC node can actually supplement. So there is a tremendous way, if we start to think about the network design, that these capabilities of MFC can allow us to become resilient and agile at the same time, meet the customer expectations. So I wanted to sort of lay this ecosystem with all of this dimension.
This is real world, Dr. Weiss, absolutely. In fact, we're working with multiple retail chains currently as we speak on that topic. Is if we have too few nodes, and nodes can be large buildings, everything is flowing through, you shut down one of them, half the company is down. So this is real world situation. And I think, to your point, creating a resilient supply chain does force you to think about a different physical network as well, where MFCs start to play a big role. That, and I think being able to have inventory locally, they may not be in the store, but it's local, also helps reduce the cost on the retail side, where you're now doing replenishment locally versus having to ship out everything. So lots of other concepts that start to layer on as you think about building resilience in the supply chain.
Precisely.
Absolutely. All right. So let's dig a little more on that. Let's talk about merchants and product companies that rely on third-party partners for fulfillment. What's important for companies to look for when selecting a micro-fulfillment center network partner?
So I think the two sets of businesses that we're talking about, one could be a large retailer. They have their own footprint. We just talked about they should be thinking about the risk factors and too few nodes and speed of delivery and so on. And then those large companies have an option to partner with the 3PL space, the third-party fulfillment space, service providers as well. And then more often we'll see younger companies, mid-sized companies, or SMB, small to mid-sized companies, leaning on these 3PLs as well. The advantage of that is if you select the right partner, you may be small, but they make you look big. Because they may have a network nationwide, and instead of delivering out of one location, if you do the math and have the inventory, you can start to deliver out of multiple locations and provide the same level of service without investing in our own infrastructure as well. So as far as finding the right partner is concerned, I think first thing is most important is to make sure you fully understand what your needs are. And what I mean by that is it's a promise that you're making to your consumer. What kind of product do you have? Uh, for example, we in some cases handle food. Food has expiry dates and so on. Um, you're limited to what you can do from a distance. It's a different supply chain over there. And then we talked about same day versus next day versus 5-day. You got to define that as well. And then you start to look for that right partner. Um, it's interesting that we often get this question saying, hey, can you help find a 3PL, or do you have space in a certain city? Could be LA. And we started digging like, why LA? Well, because our manufacturing is local in LA. So, okay. Then we say, but where is your consumer? And we look at the data and then we realize, oh, most of the customers are in the East Coast, right? Could be in Florida. So then we start saying, guys, no, LA is not a good idea. How about if because 60% is on East Coast and 40% in West Coast, let's put you in 2 nodes to do that. In the 3PL space, that's unusual. Most 3PLs don't go that distance to absorb your data. And why that is important? Because the transportation cost is always, in most cases, overlooked. And the RFPs that we see, you're looking for a partner, they focus on fulfillment cost. Hey, what's my cost per unit for fulfilling? And you might find a low cost provider, but you get started and then you realize you're actually paying more on transportation than all the savings are washed out because of that. So I think partners that, in my mind, that have capabilities to analyze data and have a nationwide network, they're able to have that discussion with you and say, hey, where's your consumers? And based on that, where should you be? That's an important piece. And again, defining if you're B2B versus direct to consumer. Are you selling your products to stores? Are you online? Are you both? The capabilities of your partner has to match with that. The MFCs, if they're getting applied, have to make sure they're designed to do both direct to consumer and B2B. And then beyond that, knowing where your inventory is all time, having live visibility into that, knowing which orders were shipped on time versus not, having visibility into, hey, did we use FedEx, UPS, DHL to ship? Did we use a local courier to ship it? It's end-to-end track and visibility that is so critical, because ultimately it's your, as a product or a merchant, it's your consumers, customers that are getting the service, and making sure that you're finding the right partner that represent you in terms of the service levels that you're promising is going to be critical. So all in all, it's the network, it's analytics, it's the technology that a certain partner is using as well. Are they able to adapt that technology to your needs, and then provide live visibility into inventory and orders. Those are some of the big factors to look for.
Yeah, so let me, Trish, I'll take a perspective, right? And here is how I would envision this to be. And I had an opportunity to speak to about 100 top sellers on the e-commerce and the multi-channel environment over the last 6 months. What is the cost of failure? What is the cost of broken promise? Let's start with that, right? So what that means, basically, if you're answering this question as a seller, distributor, retailer, is to looking at the consumer, your customer, and designing the customer-centric solution. And if you say, hey, my broken promise does not matter because my customers don't care, then I have a very different solution for you. And I don't know too many customers are like that, or too many companies can afford to have that kind of a luxury. But if you did, it's a very different solutions for you. But if you're like most of it, where the cost of broken promise, the cost of failure could be detrimental, because the cost of acquisition of customer is significant. And losing it, you're not only losing one customer, that one customer may talk to 10, and those 10 will talk to another 10. All of a sudden, they could be detrimental. This is where the failure for both the sellers, the distributors, and the retailers are massive, that to gain the loyalty, it's so hard. Losing it, very easy. So let's think from that standpoint, working backwards, right? The customer centricity, understanding the cost of broken, promise, and then I can actually then say, okay, I may have to actually create, based on what we just discussed, agile, resilient, and in some cases, most cost efficient, but some customer centricity. Now, I can bifurcate this analysis by looking at my items, my SKUs, and rationalize it, because the margins and the value of solutions we design, they work inversely proportionate. Like my high value items, I may have to actually design white glove services. My low margin items, I may have a different sort of a protocol. And so this now, all of a sudden, this level of sophistications, which 3PLs are capable, Advantix has a great deal of expertise in terms of network design and technical expertise. That is something used to be only afforded to the top 20, top 50 multinational companies. Today, that expertise is available. Even a small seller out working out of a garage can actually have preview to be able to design its supply chain through that level of technical competency. So in other words, you don't have to, as a seller, distributor, or a retailer, have to have your one strategy for your entire portfolio of items. You can actually segment that and have a different strategy that allows you to maximize your overall profitability model and still meet the consumer demand. So here's where the great sense of what 3PL can play into this space is they not only provide the solution, but they provide the technical analytics capability. Not only then they can provide the recommendation, but they can actually execute physically. And then not only they can execute physically and provide the recommendation, but they also have a technology to support you. So now you are actually being able to have this holistic way of looking at it, sophisticated solutions, which is dynamic, and it fits the need of your consumer, but also saves you incredible resources to make sure your profitability is ensured.
Yeah, amazing perspective there. Makes total sense, Dr. Weiss. I think one thing I would also add is it just a 3PL or are they a growth partner? What I mean by that is the never-ending increase in shopping carts and marketplaces and so on. Those integrations make a big difference in what can that partner do, 3PL do, to help you grow. If you're only on Amazon, for example, can they help you get into Walmart.com? Can they help open up your own Shopify and so on? So I think the traditional 3PLs that are low tech don't meet the bar anymore for these merchants. So I think it's the technology plays a big role in the growth side as well, not just fulfilling the promises right now.
Absolutely.
Great.
So, can you give a few secrets to success for how to succeed in a micro-fulfillment center?
Well, so let me start with what I see the challenges as an industry, and this is in the global setup, right? Forecasting has always been one of the biggest challenges, and we in academia and in practice have tried to nail this down. Now you think about today's environment where consumer demand is so dynamic, so real, and so infused with the variability. How do you manage to that, right? So as we talk about the MFC, you're really sensing the local level data. How quickly can you react to it? So that's the one challenge that I can think about it, right? The second is, to Manish's point earlier, you simply just because being in a backyard of your customer density does not guarantee you success. At the end of the day, the execution, there are hard KPIs that one has to really understand that how do you manage that and how do you partner with that? Because at the end of the day, the agility and resiliency is no longer an option. Doesn't matter if you're small, mid-size, or the large company. You cannot have this notion that you have one service provider, one market, and understand that you will be okay. Because just in case any man-made or natural disaster, is it going to risk your entire business model. So I think coupling those things, which are the challenges that MSC face, I think there is an incredible way to design agility, resiliency, and sustainability into the systems where one can actually start to look at how best to make sure that there is a long-term success built in with the partner, selection of partners, selection of service provider, and making sure the consumers are at the center of your business decision. Because if you're strictly operating like you might have gotten away in 70s, 80s, and 90s just with the cost and squeezing the dollars out of your supply chain, tomorrow and in the future, one would have to make sure that the partnership, the efficiency and agility and resiliency, all of these things. And then the key challenge for the seller and the retailer is to make sure that the right partnerships are established with the multiple service provider.
Absolutely.
Manish?
Yeah. So what I would add, secret to success is, first of all, knowing what you know and what you don't know, and it's okay to find a partner that fills in the gaps, because last thing you want to do is make some assumptions that are might be off. That's where we at Advarix play that role quite a bit in being that expert team to make sure we bring the experience to the table as you're designing your network or you picking a 3PL. And the other piece is, as I touched on earlier, it's the upfront planning is critical. Knowing the level of speed of delivery that you're promising, making sure that you use all available data to pick that location, design the size, design the flows, is critical. It just increases your chances of success. And that's what Dr. Weiss touched on, is having those KPIs in place and knowing what you planned, and then watching the deltas compared to what you planned. So watching the actual versus what you thought where you're going to be in terms of number of orders you might have projected in a certain market and so on. And so I think that's going to be critical. I think the MSC piece is that the financials are critical as you're looking for the partner. The lowest cost partner is not always the best answer, which I think Dr. Weiss touched on it earlier, that you want to make sure it's a robust network and resilience and all that, because it takes only one failure to wash the few cents that you saved on that point. I think I also wanted to add, but I see a question from the audience that ties into this as well, that I'll touch on. The question is, what is the scenario of quick commerce? How sustainable does that concept look? And in the last 12 months, we've seen a lot of chaos in the ultra-fast delivery space. We actually had direct experience and to some extent pain with that as well. I'll take one of our customers as an example, which is a company called Jokr, Jokr, which actually a fascinating company, great team. And they were the first fastest unicorn in US history to deliver sub 2-hour deliveries in a complex market like Manhattan. But then they chose to exit the market. And I think strategic reasons to choose to do that, but they're not the only ones. When you start looking at, other ultra-fast delivery companies, including GoPuff and so on, what it comes down to is the unit economics. What I mean by that is that, okay, if you're sending a driver out for making that quick delivery, is the size of the transaction large enough to justify sending that driver? If that driver is going out to make delivery, whether it's on a bike or a car or whatever, do they have enough deliveries to make? Do you have enough density to justify? So what I would say is just the toughest part to solve here is the last mile piece of it, which is the most expensive mile always, because you're carrying the least amount of goods in that mile. And it's just the cost is fixed in terms of the driver and the truck and so on. So regardless of how we design this, that's an important component to watch for. Anybody who's in that ultra fast delivery space, don't get me wrong, the consumer demand is there. Consumers would want it now, right? If it makes sense. The question is, can you do it cost effectively? And that's where I think anybody who is in the quick commerce ultra fast delivery segment has to watch out for that unit economic, especially for the last mile piece of it. If you have that nailed, if you have the right density, then it starts to make sense. So I think that's another part of the secret sauce you mentioned is just knowing your economics for every segment, whether it's first mile, last mile, middle mile, or the fulfillment, or a cross dock. And so it's yes, end-to-end cost, but it's also components of that supply chain that you want to make sure that you're utilizing the investment that you've made and driving that unit cost down so that it's a profitable and viable solution.
Yeah, and again, Manish, to your point, I talked about earlier, the SKU rationalization is a key to success. I mean, my high velocity, high margin, I'm going to treat it differently than the low margin will actually be with the low velocity. We'll have a very different flow path when we design. So you have to have sort of an understanding that not every network node should be treated. It depends on your items, consumer demand, and expectation. You cannot over deliver, and this is to be a very retail phenomena, that you cannot be expecting the Walmart price and expect Nordstrom service. That model has bankrupted every imaginable stakeholder. So again, it's a Nordstrom service, it's a great service, but if I'm selling and goods at the cost of goods sold at the Walmart price, no, you're gonna walk your aisles and find the product, and it may take you another hour to do that. You're not gonna have a sales associate following you and taking care of your needs. Same thing, no difference in a MFC and this environment where high velocity, high margins versus low velocity, high margins versus low velocity, low margins. That matrix would have to be analyzed, and you have to have a very tailored pathways to ensure that at the end of the day, there is a profitability and the gross margins that allows you to be successful to not only service your consumer today or your customer today, but tomorrow and day after and so forth.
Absolutely. All right, so we just have a few minutes left. So let's look a little to the future. How do you see MFCs evolving over the next 5 years?
We could keep going for another hour.
I know.
We don't have time.
That's why I had to give the warning.
Yeah, I think this is such a hot topic in the industry because it starts to solve so many things if done right.
Absolutely.
And I think some of this I will be summarizing our discussion so far, which is we talked about how do you de-risk the supply chain. You know, we just went through a pandemic and there's a war going on, right? And these things will continue. Different things will continue to happen. Are you able to design a network, a supply chain that can withstand all these shocks? And then we also talked about catering to the expectations of the consumer, and they're expecting fast and fast. How can you do it cost effectively, that it makes sense as well? So I think it's new way of thinking. In the past, having fewer big block buildings with lots of automation made sense. Where we're heading is what's making more sense now is a network that is more, a supply chain that is more adaptable.
Yep.
Not only to what the consumers are asking for, but the changing conditions and so on, which means that you need to be able to add, delete, change on the fly if needed. And it's not easy, but it can be done, you know, and just designing the right network and the flexibility that is needed. That's when micro fulfillment centers play a big role. In many cases, we've seen, and we're doing that, you know, with our sister company Expedel as well, that we use the micro fulfillment centers for fulfillment, but guess what? You can also use it for a cross dock to do last mile delivery as well. So multi-use of buildings is more and more being used. In the past, there were one customer buildings. That's not the case anymore, right? In many cases, you want to have it's diversification as well. You want to have multiple customers being served out of the MFCs as well. So I think it's the future, and this is going to be a critical part of it. Designing it right, getting it right is going to be critical. And if you do it right, there's significant market advantage by having more local high-speed delivery presence using the micro fulfillment centers. I'm sure Dr. Vyas has a perspective on this as well.
Wow. Let me actually wrap with some of the data points, right? In US today, we've gone from 110 million to 230 million e-commerce shopper. Right? That's about 78% of our populations we're looking at it today. If I take interpolate that number into the global, close to 4 billion people today have access to e-commerce shopping. So this is not a phenomena that's likely to dissipate. This is a way of life going forward. So if we start with that hypothesis, well, we can start to talk about it, that some of the early data analytics and market research that we're looking at it, close to 7,000 MFCs are predicted by 2030 only in the United States, right? Consumer expectation is not going to be going on other directions where somebody will say, well, you know what, I'm okay. I don't need you to come deliver today. Just wait for next week because I'm okay. I'm happy as I am. That's not going to happen. The expectations are continuing to challenge our supply chain networks to become more innovative, more agile, more consumer centric, right? So if we think about that, that leads us to the automations we touched on it. ASRS, autonomous mobile robots known as AMRs, hybrid model, vertical sequences, driving efficiencies, creating a tailored, customized, SKU-based network design flow. All of these things makes me so excited about the future of MSCs and big integral part, not to mention, it is one of the most way to have the resilient supply chain, which is close to the customer in a smaller nodes. So if 1 or 2 or even half a dozen nodes were to go down, it can be substituted rather easily than having 1 or 2 nodes that gets blown up. You are risking the entire network, which is very impossible to recover from. So in my view, I'm very optimistic. This is a space, it's a hyper growth space. And I think the 3PL and solution provider in this industry has an incredible future ahead of them.
Absolutely. I agree. Manish, anything
Great.
else? Any closing thoughts?
No, I think I can't top Dr. Weiss's overview on this. It's been an amazing discussion so far.
Absolutely. This was great. Thank you both so much for your time today. To our attendees, thank you for joining us. There will be a link that will go out with this recorded. And if you do have any questions, please reach out, send emails, and we'll certainly get back with you. But thanks everyone for your time. Have a great week.
Thank you,
Thank
Trish.
you.
Thank you all.
Thank you,
Until next
Trish.
time.
Thank you, Dr. Weiss.
Thank you, Manish.
Bye-bye.